Good. Tap or test. You know what might be on. Tap and bar. Oh, okay.
There we go. Okay. All right. Welcome, everyone. I'm glad there's interest in sitting down and talking about the transition process. Today we have with us, I know, a number of the elders. Just so you know who all's involved in this process, I have been up on the microphone, but let me say I'm only representing the two main groups who are involved in three groups actually, Leadership Council, but also elders and Pastoral Search Committee. Your elders, of course, are always listed in the bulletin, so please contact any of us if you have specific questions. That's Galen, me, Herb, Ken, Jenny, and Merle. And then, of course, Pastoral Search Committee, Matt and Derek are co-chairs. Shannon, Kathy, Julie, Dan, and Galen are all part of the Pastoral Search Committee. Today, we're going to... of course, last week you were presented with in your mailboxes a report to the congregation, and we made a verbal report. So hopefully you've had time to look that over, think of some questions, comments, advice for the committees, and we'll turn it over to questions in just a little bit. Your questions, of course, may be related to the report, what the center had to say about our church, which was listed in the report. The CAT team or Catalyst team process that they've recommended that's coming up. You may have questions about how we're defining the role of the new pastor and the roles of Gary and Lowell. However, let me say that a lot of that is still being worked on and we don't have answers yet. But you're welcome to ask anything. We'll do our best to answer. So while you're thinking of your questions, Galen's going to make just a couple comments and then we'll open it up to questions.
Trying to get all the cords out so I don't take another spill. Let's bow our heads. Jesus, I just need your guidance and direction. For everybody here, we're really here in very serious work and business on a day when it's rainy and it would, for some it's just absolutely impossible to come, but when it'd be very easy to stay home, we could not only come to church, but we stay afterwards and talk about church. Give us wisdom, dear Jesus, in your name, amen. Thank you very much for coming. I truly do mean that, and I appreciate very much this opportunity. As I couldn't be more thankful how God put together, like Scott's coming and talking. I was counting on, because David lives up in that area, and I drive by the church. I thought what I kind of know what he's going to talk about. Completely different. I said to him, afterwards, now, hey, I wasn't counting on this whole new wrinkle. He says, that's not how God works. God changes things up. And I said, well, that was about how long ago? 3 years ago. I thought it's kind of interesting because that's kind of a number that we began to hear. But this morning I pulled a Lowell, and Lowell, if you're watching this, and then he talks about the shower. I'll talk about the shower. This morning I began to think, man, how long have I been coming to this church? And I thought back, and the big thing with we heard from the center was inviting people to come to our church. And I'm one of the guilties, so that's why I can talk about this. One statistic that really jumped out at me is that 80% of the people that said they really enjoyed the sermons, that they're really the best sermons ever, 80% of the people that said that at this church that did not invite anybody to church for the last number of years. And that's me. That's not the way it should be. And I thought to myself, wow. And as I was watching the children up here, I thought, boy, I'm really glad that Arlen and Janet invited Bev and I, and exactly, I did some math, 43 years ago, they invited us to come to this church. Because we were seriously considering going to Blooming Glen, and we visited there for quite some time, then also Plains. And then they said, why don't you try our church? Well, why don't we try it? And we did, and we couldn't be more happy to come here and to join in with you guys. And that was because Arlen and Janet invited us. And you know what's really funny about it? Is I would not have been offended if I would not have come. You know what I mean? Often we're afraid to invite people, like, how would they think of us? Usually people appreciate it when people invite others to come. So, Arlen, Janet, thank you very, very much. Then I began to think back, how have wineskins changed in the past number of years? Now, Bev, she may be here, but this is what happened. Bev does not come from a Mennonite background, comes from a Lutheran background. Now, she began to, because she wanted to join be with other kids. She began to go to Mennonite church in high school. That's how she ended up, going to EMU. And they thought, what is she doing going to EMC at that time? But she did, and then we started to come here. And one thing we've never really talked about is, that was kind of funny, and my mother was not Mennonite either. My father was. So it's kind of an interesting marriage. When we joined here, we talked with that time as Dan Longenecker and said we wanted to join and everything. He says, he kind of embarrassingly said, you know what? She's going to have to wear a covering. I said, okay. Pastor says, where do you get a covering? What is a covering? So we began to ask the people, and Mary Haynes was so nice, and I remember, Mary, you don't remember any of this probably. Said, well, there's a place in bottom of Sadders, down the hill, left-hand side, no coverings there. So where do you go next? So we asked somebody else. There's a place up in Penn Ridge, up in there. Please, you go up there. We went up to this both places are gone. We found one. She wore it the one time. That worked out pretty good. But anyway, we all became members, and she did wear that. I think she's probably the last person that probably was asked to have to wear a covering to join the church. But she did, and she doesn't not hold it in. I thought, oh my word, what's this going to be? But anyway, I thought to myself, the wineskins, all the wineskins we've had here. So I'm going to go really fast over this. Do you know, and Sam is sitting back here, Sam Rittenhouse has been so faithful. 40 years ago, Sam and a number of people weathered the storm, and they started the nursery school. I'm aware of a lot of things here that have been new wineskins for us. One was a nursery school 40 years ago. Without Arlene Helfrich and Sam Rittenhouse, it would probably not be there. Another one was Boys and Girls Club. Harry and Betty Lou have done so much. That was a new wineskin. Summer Bible School, Sunday School. There was a little period of time where we said, let's stop Summer Bible School. We need a new wineskin. And they did. Remember that? They switched it from like the daytime to like an evening. That was new wineskin. Then we had this big, big thing where we went and said, let's have 2 services. Are you kidding me? I have to come to church not at 9, but 8:30? I did, and I enjoyed it. Remember that? That was a big deal, switching to 2 services for a while. Then also Lowell began to think, well, how about senior fellowship? We started Kids for Christ, youth program, purchased land. Here's land. Do we want to buy that? Do we really need it? We have a lot of land here. It goes all the way back. Yes, we did. Look what we'd be if we didn't have that. People gave money. When we first came here, to buy this property, I was curious, move from there to here, how much money would be owed on this place? I don't think we had a burning any mortgage or anything, did we, Arlen? Did they? 10 years? Okay, but we've been such a faithful congregation. It's been very, very faithful to see. The house was renovated. Do we tear it down? Do we fix it up? Alicia and Jeremy are living there. What a wonderful place it is. Additional service, youth area. What do we do with the garage? Let's make it into a youth area. These are all new wineskins that we've had in the past. The biggest wineskin was Lowell Delp himself. And Lowell, you know this is true because when Lowell Delp was called, said, we need a pastor. How are we going to get a pastor? Then we felt that he was being called out. Now, at the same time this is all going on, get a little bit of the history, we had deacons. Now, should we have elders? We went through this big, big process of getting elders. Okay, what about women elders? We went through that too. Yes. Women elders, women leadership as well. So we went through a lot of those wineskins that we would talk about. But going back to Lowell with that, where should Lowell go to school? Does he need to have school? How are we going to pay for Lowell to go to school and yet fund another path? Do we have enough money? Yes, it came in. Now, out in the fellowship hall, I don't know if you noticed or not, there are some plaques. You probably have seen those plaques. You read some of those names, you say, who in the world are those people? You know, we have some funds in this church that helps with the center and other things have been given for times like this because they have given like money. It may not be a part of it. They knew that it would be used faithfully here as a congregation. We can think back and new wineskins like Biker Sunday. A big one is up in the corner, which I did not realize. It's no longer there. That was kind of like when Greg Bishop, he passed away, I think in 75, 76, 75, I think it was. And then we got an organ. And that was like, okay, what do we do with the music with an organ? Elders ministry, deaf ministry, movies. There's one of the most top Christian groups right now. We had by chance before they were popular right here at our church. Remember that? So there's a lot that's happened. There's some things I wish that would have happened. There's some way. One would have been Jarrell Hange. Jarrell Hange, I understand you are a very, very good guitar player. Is that right, Mary? Is he? But we never heard him up front here. But Jarrell would have been good. You've been that. So I'm saying is that we have lots and lots of wineskins that we've been through. So when we got to this point in our life of the church, what do? Are we okay, it's like a business, let's hire somebody to replace Lowell? Is that what we're about? Just being able to replace somebody? Make sure we get somebody good pastor so I feel good for 80% of the time, not inviting anybody any percent of the time? What do we do? What are we called to do? Maybe just kind of double check with you that there's kind of like two things that are going on here. So it seems kind of weird. You have the one thing is the pastoral search, which I think is what it's all about. We all like to have things kind of the same. And I'd like to say that one thing that I really believe, and Arlen told me this many years ago, is that what people don't understand, they don't agree with. And that's me. If I don't understand it, I don't want to go there. So if you don't understand that, I apologize. I understand. And even if you don't, that's okay too, but I'll do my very best to try and explain the position of it. But anyway, with a pastoral search, you have a pastoral search committee. Their job is to replace Lowell. That's one part of it. There's another part, and it's on the second. Pastoral search, the first, that's going to start soon. The process is we need to agree on the process, how it's going to be done, what the pastor's going to look like. It's called the pastoral profile, how you describe the person, and then you have the salary and the benefits, like how they're going to take care of their family, how they're going to live, that sort of thing. Then you have a systematic search goes on, recommendation that comes from you. They're not going to hire them without us all agreeing to it. We're going to see who they are. So that needs wisdom and prayer. But that, to me, is like half. And when we think of getting the center, like, why in the world do we need that group? And actually, I was kind of like, I didn't agree, I didn't understand. I was kind of like, no, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But I think it really does. The more I think about it, the more I see God putting the pieces together. What we've been doing is that helped being able to see where we're at as a congregation, what we need to work on. And then the next step is this. This is the step that's kind of like a little bit tricky on the other side. The next step is something called a catalyst group. And that's kind of what Scott was. Like, when I talked to Scott, and he said that that's what he was planning to do 3 years ago. God had a completely different plan. God has plans for us as a congregation, I think, too. And the catalyst group, called a catalyst, is something that starts something else, chain reaction, right, Harry? So the catalyst group is a group of people that are going to meet together. They're going to be able to try and look and think and plan. What are 2 or 3 things that we can work on in the next 2 or 3 years to get some things, some positive things? Now, this is going to be lay people. So don't make anybody feel like you're out in the back. We're trying to bring you right in real shortly. But it's not going to be the pastors or Alicia or Lowell. It's going to be lay people. You guys, we're going to be looking at and trying to decide what's the best way that we can move our congregation forward by looking at our demographics. Our demographics look like this. Older. God, they look like guys that need to have shoulder surgery. So we need to have younger people. We need younger people. That's what it's all about. So I think that's what we're trying to do. That's one thing that really came out. Number one, we have a really good ratio of boy-girl, men, women. Some churches I've been into, and like a Lutheran church I attend sometimes with Bev's family, is it's mainly women. Seriously, mainly women. We don't have that. We have really strong, even balanced men, women. And we have the bump kind of goes like down during the with the age group, that goes back up about, 50 years old on up. But we have this little lull in there. It's kind of scary, because if we don't like try and address that, if we don't try and bring people in that are younger, we're all going to be like, having shoulder surgery. So that's kind of what we're thinking at. So the Catalyst Group is to think of a visible vision, and it's to make it really plain for you guys to say, okay, where are we going as a church? We have this little saying that's in our bulletin all the time. But when somebody comes up to you and says, what are you doing as a church? And you can say, this is what we're doing and why we're doing it. We all know what Scott Roth is doing, don't we? We all know what he's about. That's what we want to be about. We want to be able to let people know how it can be done, and then also know how can you help. You're not going to be in favor of something if you can't help. So that's one of the real important thing, is we all need to know what it is. We need to be able to tie it in, be able to help other people. So it's more, this is kind of interesting with long-term planning. It used to be 10-year plan, then 5-year plan. Did they say now? 3-year plan. And then you have a team that's going to help plan for the church. They say then you work for that about 18 months, then that kind of disbands. Then you have another new team that starts again to start planning again. So you need to think of 3-year plans for your church in order to be able to have it continue to grow and to become better. The planning team we're going to try and get is going to be one that's going to be not just all people that are practical nuts and bolts, not just dreamers, not just people that would be communicators, but people that would be able to have different gifts to come together. Then we're going to try and communicate that to you and bring everybody else on board. So this is separate from finding somebody to replace Lowell. Does it make sense? So it's kind of separate. So that's kind of the two different things, if that kind of makes sense. Last of all, I'll share one quick story. A lot of things ran through my mind, but this is one I think I'm going to stick with. Michelle, my daughter-in-law, has an uncle. Her uncle is Gerald. Gerald was an executive with Kodak, and Kodak is in Europe, and he was in charge of Kodak Europe with digital photography. And that's because the medical industry used digital photography for many, many years for teeth and for, the medical field. And he kept saying to them, Kodak, you got to move digital to the consumer. Guess what? They said, no. It's a blue chip company, big company, Kodak. Why should we go digital? Number one, we have to give up all the cameras that we have, that we're selling, a lot of cameras. Remember 35 millimeter cameras? All the film industry, all the little canisters, those people out of work. What are we going to do that? Well, guess what? They had all the technology. They developed it. They lost out. By the time they picked up on it, other companies had developed it. And you know what happened to Kodak? They declared bankruptcy, I think, didn't they? They had to reorganize. So that's what can happen if you're too far behind. I'm not saying we're like Kodak. I just think it's an interesting analogy, maybe to think about. But we want to hear from you. I thought about this last of all. Matthew 9 talked about Jesus that went to the towns and villages preaching, teaching, healing. And one thing he had compassion on the harassed and helpless. And I had to pray to God and say, Jesus, I don't have compassion. That's kind of hard, because we all think we do. The harvest is plentiful. I'll drop it at that. Tom, do you want to pick up now? Thank you.
Yeah, we have nothing formal. I'll just open it up to any questions, and Gail and I will try to answer. Or if we somebody who's involved in a specific thing, we'll do that. Anyone?
Yeah. If you have a question, we'll get you the mic as we're recording this. So, anyone?
Galen kind of mentioned the money to the center. We don't know what's going on, which is fine. We don't need to. But we do kind of have an obligation to understand where all the money is going that we're paying to them. Do you feel that the $30,000 or whatever it is worth the money is worth what we're getting out of it?
It's an awful steep amount of money. And let me first of all say that it's in 3 phases. We have done phase 1 and we're now in phase 2. The phase 3 is another big expensive piece, which we may not need, but that's still being discussed. There are different opinions among elders and leadership council about whether that should be done. I think, though, that what's been done so far with the center has been extremely valuable. We were just stuck as leadership elders. We could not agree on a chairperson. There's so many moving parts to juggle that we were just paralyzed. So the center was, I think, an extremely valuable way of having someone come in and say, here are the problems. First of all, they evaluated our church, and to be honest, I don't think we learned anything we didn't already know about the church. But to have someone else come in and say, hey, yes, you are right. These are the problems. These are the good things about your church. And these are the things you're going to have to look at improving. And then saying, here's a nuts and bolts way, of working at this with this, team. We're now much more better organized as leadership, working together. So I think what the money that's been spent has been, well spent so far. Whether that last piece is necessary, whether we can just use our own resources and Frank Honeyman and conference resources to do the actual search process is something that there's different opinions on, but we'll just have to work it out. The entire piece was $30,000, which is a big chunk of money. Anything else I can clarify about that?
Okay, one more question. I am just, struggling a little bit with trying to understand why, and I don't mean this in a cruel way, but why is Dan Landis still on this search committee?
I'll be happy to. I'm not positive because I was asked the same as Dan, but I think, number one, we appreciate Dan's wisdom and the many years he's given to the church. But I think he was asked to be a part of it earlier. I'm not a part of that, so I really don't know. So I'm not sure. So I can't really respond to that.
One thing I would add is that again, I was not part of that selection process either, but as elders we held final approval. But he does represent a significant group of people who have left this church. And the question is, why did they leave? And what do they see is necessary to change to bring them back, and that sort of thing. So there is some thought that is part of the reason there. But we recognize there's pros and cons to having somebody who's not actively a member of the church on the search committee. Some people felt that that's a benefit. We needed to have that viewpoint. Others felt, no, it's inappropriate, including our lead advisor questioned whether that was appropriate. So it's one of those things that evolved, and that's the best explanation I can give.
Roscoe.
A lot of our young people, they get married and leave the area because they can live cheaper somewhere else, and they get jobs somewhere else. That's another big item why we don't have a lot of young people. Mm-hmm. The last 3, the ones that graduated last year, they all got jobs at other places.
Yeah, there's so many factors involved in why the millennial generation, there's a gap, in church attendance there. And it's not just a weakness of our church. Virtually, it's something that has been found across the board in all churches. Life is changing around us, and millennials have so many options. They're mobile, they're leaving home, they're traveling, job changes occur regularly. So it's something that is a fact of life nowadays. It's not necessarily because our church is weak that we don't have, millennials or young people here. But it's something we have to face and see, in order for the long-term health of the church, how do we approach that? And when we've been looking at the priorities of the church with the center, the priorities that at least elders and pastoral search came up with is worship, as a way of retaining the young people, and also the children's ministry and how that flows out into the youth and young adults to retain them. So, however, those priorities are now going to be looked at and refined by this catalyst team that we're talking about.
And you may have touched on this before, I don't know, but could you just tell again, like, or what the plan is going forward? I know we had mentioned about taking a look at the bylaws and maybe, changing things that, that it's many years since that's been done, but what's the timeline and the order of how those things are going to occur?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as I understand it, first of all, the pastoral search is now entering its more active phase. So that is going on. The pastoral search committee will be refining the pastoral profile and the job description, and then the active search process will start, when that's done, because we now have a 1-year time frame for doing that. These other things all sort of bracket the search. So these other things are things that were impressed upon us. We don't bring in a pastor to do for us, but we have to get working on. And so the way we're going to work on that is with this catalyst team, a small group representative of the church, helping elders and the other leadership groups to refine our priorities, boil it down to a very simple thing that the entire church can get behind, and so that we make sure that the pastor who comes in is his or her priorities align with ours. Then the active search is going on. In the meantime, at the same time, this catalyst team will be spending about a 3-month time frame doing its work, and then present its work to the leaders of the church. Now the other thing was your question about governance. That was something that the center recommended that we take a hard look at potentially changing our governance. We decided it was a little bit too much to do that at the same time as we're doing all this other stuff. And so although we think in the long term there is a good argument to be made for looking at our governments, whether we revamp our governing structures, make them simpler and that sort of thing, we decided it was a little too much to do now in addition. So, but the concerns they had about complexity and communication and working together, we felt we could address them, and I think we have by having leadership, elders and key members of Leadership Council and Pastoral Search meet together, every month. So we've addressed those concerns for communication and smooth functioning in another way, and we put the piece of changing governments off until later on.
Does the center see a talent pool growing or diminishing that we'll be able to look at for a candidate?
You mean for the type of person?
Right.
What came through pretty strongly is that there's a plethora of people that probably will apply, but that means you need to be more astute than ever at making the right decision. Because they even talked about, which I never thought about this, there's been some good research that people that, like, for example, our expectations here of a pastor are a lot different than expectations, as I grew up in Iowa, than people in Iowa. So sometimes to pull a guy from Iowa or Nebraska or Texas into this locality is more stressful than you'd think. They also talked a lot about the fact that you need to interview very, very thoroughly and carefully, and things to look for that I hadn't thought about before. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So as far as the number of people, yes. You have to also sort through the theology as well.
And then a follow-up question would be the reality that probably we won't have a pastor here as long as we did with Lowell.
I don't know.
I don't know. It seems like pastors change more frequently now
Yeah.
than.
It really kind of does and did. But if you think back on our own history, we had Bob Walters, Ken Seitz, we had Woody Woodcock, and maybe another one. So we went for a while of interim people, and we were blessed by each one of those ministries. They brought a certain facet. Then so blessed with Lowell and Brenda and Gary. So it's interesting how God works things out. So we can't look ahead, and I don't know. I don't know the answer.
I just didn't know if we're doing this now and then in 3-4 years we'll be doing it again.
We could be. Yeah, I don't know. Hopefully we're doing it for the right reason, though. It's not because somebody shouldn't have been hired, basically.
This Catalyst group, where are they from, and how do they gather their data?
They would be people from our own church right here, our own congregation. What we did is
The group of people that we're paying the $30,000 to, that are making these recommendations of.
Be in prayer for Tom and I, because what happened was we asked the pastoral search committee and the elders and leadership to submit names of people. So we're going to eat lunch together, and we're going to look through and try and think who we think would be ideal after hearing from the center, what they would think would be ideal job descriptions of people to fit into there. So we don't come with any preconceived.
I probably used the wrong word there. The center, this group of people that we're paying the $30,000 to, is that a group of people that are?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that are observing us or interviewing us, or how do they? The
center, which is based at Calvary Church, is a consulting group that has a lot of experience in helping churches go through transitions. So they have specialists who in church organization and leadership transitions and that sort of thing. So they came and did the interview process with about 30 people in the congregation, did a survey. They looked through all our history, all our structure, our bylaws and constitution and all that, and then they put together about a 30-page report out of that and helped us go through it as leadership to understand the church and sort of map out a road forward. So it's a consultation group that we've been working with.
Galen and Tom, I just want to say thank you for all that you are doing. As I came here today and just listened to what my mind now fully engaged in this moment, I am aware of how much, a growing awareness of how much behind the scene is happening. And personally, what I am feeling called to do right now is to be more intently praying for what you and the others that are actively involved are doing. And I asked the Lord how best to do that, and immediately got some reassurance that I feel are just words for a congregation. And the one is, he who began a good work will be faithful to complete it. And for those moments where the questions are arising, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God. And a reminder that you are willing, you're his vessels, but each one of us here, as we look to God, just the reassurance that he will guide, and he is guiding. So I just want to say the voice of takeaway that I would hope you would hear from me is just a deeper commitment to be praying for the process.
Yeah, thank you. In response to that, I'm trying to have an attitude of enthusiasm and looking forward to the whole process. I'd have to say, though, my dominant feeling has been one of fear, though, and wondering how I got here in front of a microphone. I happen to be on elders. I have one more year to go, and all of a sudden there's this task in front of us, and here I am. And I thought, I'm not sure I really want to be in this responsibility. And Galen, to entertain and amaze us, is even going to do it with one hand tied to his side. But I think, we can be honest with each other. I feel a great sense of inadequacy, and I'm up here because I like to write and I like to talk, and so I'm willing to do this, be a part of it rather. I'm certainly don't want to be in front of the microphone implying that I'm in charge of this. It's a group effort. But I think the thing, of course, that always worries, and many of you have been through difficult transitions, and there's been good things and there's been bad things about it. It's very difficult. And, the problem is we're caught between differing expectations, of what church should be and what kind of pastor we should have. And, the center says, to us that this is an opportunity for change that should not be missed. But on the other hand, the message, I'm sort of a go along, get along kind of guy. I want to just have everyone agree and to change, when you're a go along, get along kind of person, change does not come easily. I don't want to offend anyone. The center says that, when you have an opportunity to change that's not to be missed, the way you change and bring about new things is by dismantling the old structures. And they said that's where the conflict arises, and that's what we understand. Everyone has their vested interests, and when you are facing change, it becomes very difficult, and you can lose friends if you say, no, our church's priorities we've discerned to be here, and we're going to pull resources from here to put into another area. It's very difficult. We're all worried we're going to break this thing. We don't want to break what's already working, a wonderful church that we have. So I'll just, on the other hand, if we don't change, as Galen has said, will we dwindle away? The center comes in and they throw some scary things out there. They sat with leadership and say, churches with your demographics are generally closing their doors in 15 years. Well, none of us want to be in the position of having to offend people by making changes, but then we also don't want to be the ones who had our hands on the wheel when things dwindled and eventually the doors closed. So there's these differing expectations, and I sometimes feel like it's a lose-lose proposition, because if you change, it's going to be difficult. If you don't change, it's going to dwindle. I think that God does have plans for Line Lexington, and we will get through this and get there. But I want to confess how inadequate I feel and how fearful I am. But I think with your support, we'll all get through this together. Any other questions? Barb.
Tom, that explanation that you just did, like on demographic misalignment, does that cover some of the challenges that's listed in 2A or 2B on the paper that was sent out? It says some of the challenges, the demographic misalignment with the surrounding community, weakness in music and worship experience. What does some of that, what does that mean? Mm-hmm. They weren't happy with the music that we have?
I think a big thing is I always think of worship, you think of music. That's not quite right. It's more just the whole experience that's happening. And I don't know how to answer that yet. That's kind of like the charge that we need to think about. Mm-hmm. So we know the issue is that we want to have more people that are, from age high school, college on up, to about, 45, 50. So that's kind of the dip we see in there that we want to try and work on. I'm not sure how to.
Yeah, I know the report, as far as demographic misalignment, they've said we are an aging congregation, and I think the statistics show that 25% I'll have to read back through the report, but most of us are over age 44. If you look at the 18 to 44 group that we'd like to build, 80% of the congregation is over that age 44, age range. And so, whereas the surrounding community is younger, and we want to bring in, younger people to help grow the church. So that was the point they were making about demographic misalignment. And then the question is, is our worship then, if we look at our priorities, are building young adults, young families, is our worship doing that? And, or is our worship appealing mainly to the older people among us? And so there's where, if we say our church priority is the younger age group, then we have to look at, do we have to make changes in our worship experience, and that sort of thing. I don't know if that answered your questions or not.
Yes.
And that's what we'll be looking at the Catalyst Group to say, yes, these are the priorities of the church. And then we have to look at every single ministry we do and say, is that ministry aligned with a priority? For instance, if our priority is growing young people, children's ministry, worship experience, then everything, Biker Sunday, the Sunday schools, the adult Sunday school, which is primarily appealing mainly to the gray heads among us, how do we change those, to align with the church's priorities?
Anybody else? Thank you for keeping us to your prayers. Gary, do you want to come up and have a follow-up prayer for us all then? We really, really appreciate it very much, and I'm sure a lot of things will come up, and I want to say how much we appreciate Gary and Alicia, all the work you do all the time here at our church. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody, for coming here. It was a great turnout for a rainy Memorial Day weekend. And I know that if you come up with any other questions later, you know how to get a hold of these guys and somebody else on the search committee, and I'm sure they could give you some answers. Let's pray. God, you've been faithful to us through the years, through the centuries, Lord. And I just know that you have a plan for this church to prosper, to move ahead, Lord. I thank you for the ones that have taken the leadership role in this, as it's an enormous amount of work and time, and I know time is a valuable possession for people. So I want to pray for the leadership. I want to pray for the center as they guide us and lead us, Lord. And I just pray that this transition will be smooth. There'll be some bumps in the road, but Lord, we need to know that you're in control and you are leading us through this process. We thank you for Lowell and Brenda for the 30 some odd years, that they've been here at this church. And as they move on to their time of retirement, I just pray that you give them peace, that you just be with them as they can relax and enjoy life and just continue to do work for you. Lord, again, I do thank you for your leading, for your guidance. And I just pray for this church as we go through this transition. May we always look to you. We pray this in your name. Amen. Amen.
Before we split a second, do you want to cut it off there a second, Scott?